America's strong bonds with Israel are well known.
The close and special relationship between our two countries.
No American president will let Israel go down the tube.
Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel.
This bond is unbreakable.
Someday you'll have to explain that to me, because I don't think they liked Israel too much. I'm sorry.
A young nation getting so much attention from a rich, older nation. If it were people, I think we'd have all sorts of assumptions on what's going on where we cannot see. Why would a great power and the leader of the free world choose a tiny nation surrounded by enemies to be its ally? Well, I'm here to answer that. I went on a journey, asking ChatGPT, watching videos online, and where did it get me? Absolutely nowhere, obviously. So I dug deeper, went into the archives, combined testimonies and geopolitics, everything that I could, so I could give you the information that matters and so that you wouldn't do all the boring stuff. I knew one day my service in the intelligence would make a difference.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make.
The United States and Israel share a very famous bond and relationship, but lately we've been hearing more and more voices criticizing the US support for Israel. A lot of people ask themselves, is it worth the scrutiny and billions of dollars?
If you want my money, you better listen to me.
So I guess it is a good place to start. Okay, here is one-line explanation that I plucked out of one of those answers that ChatGPT gave me. Israel provides a strategic American foothold in the Middle East, as well as intelligence and advanced technological partnership in both the civilian and military worlds. And here are some questions that would uncover the reality behind this BFF facade. A. Advanced technological partnership. How did it happen? Sharing technology requires a crazy amount of trust, or desperation.
I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons.
Choose help. Who is the intelligence collected on? Who are the enemies that Israel and the United States share, and why?
Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, ISIS, Al-Qaeda.
American foothold in the Middle East.
And now, Lebanon. First pictures of U.S. Marines swarming ashore from the Navy Task Force.
Why does America need a foothold in the Middle East? This is a speech J.F. Kennedy had made in 1960. The influence of this nation and other maritime powers must be brought to bear on a just solution that removes all discrimination at the Suez Canal for all times, and the White House must take the lead. I want to highlight the word strategic. What makes Israel strategic? Critical. And the last most important question is, why Israel? The offer would be made with equal frankness to both sides, even the Jews, and all the world would be watching the response of each side. It's a hint here. There is a hint.
But don't think that decision to recognize Israel is an easy one.
Keep watching all the way, because I'm gonna review the actual history. Not the prettified one, but the actual history.
If Washington had spent 1% of the time it has spent trying to get Benjamin Netanyahu out of power in Jerusalem, trying to get the mullahs out of power in Tehran, the mullahs would be out of power in Tehran by now.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. After the Islamic Revolution, the Iranians declared immediately that they are against the United States and declared a war against them.
The Iranians have said themselves, going back to Ayatollah Khomeini, that their top priority is not Iran, but Allah. And so if they get into a war in which Iran is knocked out, but they then strike a blow for Allah, they're happy with that.
And failing any serious sign that the United States would attack, would you say that it's the duty of the Prime Minister of Israel and his cabinet to order an attack?
Oh, absolutely. But think of how pathetic this is, that the fate of the United States of America would be in the hands of a country smaller than Lake Michigan.
And now we're acting as if it's not the Americans that had put Israel in the situation. It is in. Weird.
هل تعتقد أن المجتمع الدولي سيسمح لإسرائيل أو حتى حليفتها أمريكا؟
I want you to notice something. We have news in English and Arabic here, and the words of Ayatollah Khamenei in Farsi, all of which was broadcasted by the mainstream Western media outlet the BBC. I want you to pay attention to the Holy Trinity that is mentioned in all of them. Israel, United States, the international community. The international community is representing the West.
I think the international community has to make sure that whatever Israel does is not upending the regional order as we know it. And the US has a responsibility. So we've been in this cause for 12 months now of constantly red lines being crossed, mostly by the Israelis. The Hezbollah and Iran have played it fairly rationally.
They do it on purpose. This is called mark the enemy. It sounds like they are criticizing Israel, but they are actually giving the international community an impossible mission. They can manipulate this lack of transparency in a way that would make you feel like America is an evil empire and that they collaborate with evil nations and that the West is evil. And it is a very comfortable way to sneak in communistic and Islamistic and other great ideologies. While researching this topic, I went through currently available videos on the matter, and they were mostly by the likes of Al Jazeera.
A lot of people might criticize this idea that both the US and Israel are beacons of democracy.
Al Jazeera, being the mouthpiece of Qatar, a nation that promotes the Islamic ideology as well as the Iranian narrative, and for the record, the Iranian narrative says that the top priority of a nation should be forcing women to cover their hair. Yes, that is like 100 times higher in their list than, let's say, I don't know, the cure for cancer. America is an evil empire because America stops them from enforcing hijab all over the world. They are not cooperating with that ideology. And hijab is so fundamental to them that that was the first thing that the Muslim Brotherhood tried to demand from the Egyptian government. And the same goes for the Iranian regime. Who said Shiites and Sunnis cannot agree?
Also, this is just part of colonization.
Yeah, and similarly minded platforms. And here's what they're saying. I narrowed it down to two main points. One, America is an empire with the undertone that empires are evil.
Israel has played a crucial role in attacking and destabilizing independent Arab governments determined to defy US dictates.
But from an Arab perspective, Arabs always looked at the United States as their best ally, as their protector, as their guarantor of their security. Like, no matter what happens to them, no matter even how big are the internal conflicts between them, they know that the United States is always there to get things back on track.
Let's sidetrack for a moment. Okay, so America is an empire and it has military bases all over the world, as empires should. But how much does it cost? Yo, ChatGPT, what you saying? It is classified information. Oh, there you go. 50-60 billion annually, which means, according to ChatGPT, from an economic perspective, the alliance with Israel may offer a more efficient use of US resources. Why does ChatGPT think like that? Let's continue. Here's the thing, America is an empire, and it is policing the trade routes all over the world. But just because it gets cheap prices and happy rich citizens and a lot of potential customers for it, doesn't make them evil, because here's the thing. It's something that a lot of channels choose to never mention for some reason. It is done with consent. This way, a small nation that has oil doesn't have to build an army so that it can protect itself from threats that are several times its size, right? So instead, you have the United States that is making sure that the world order is that we have agreed upon. I mean, not everybody participated in that agreement, so maybe that's part of the problem, is kept. And they do it without even enforcing communism on you, or the Stasi, which is a great plus. Here's the thing, though. America does bring its own agenda and policy with it, and the worldview that it has. It is something between here comes democracy and we need a place that we can conduct business in. Jokes aside, though, it's way better than communism, or any other option known to man. And that is something that is needed to be appreciated. That is one of the reasons we have relative peace in the world that we live in.
And one of the deepest commitments of America is tolerance.
And since America relaxed its grip, we're seeing that there is conflict that is rising up, and that Russia and China are back at the game.
There will be a reversion to not communism, which has failed, but what I call a new despotism, which would pose a mortal danger to the rest of the world, because it would be infected with the virus of...
Where there is void, there are players.
You've been an activist in Egyptian politics. You're quite well known in Egypt. How did you experience U.S. foreign policy throughout all of these things?
It was never been the same over these years. It has gone through fluctuations, waves of ups and downs, about how, first of all, how the Arabs looked at the United States sometimes as an ally, sometimes as a protector, sometimes as...
You're talking about the Arab states.
The Arab states mainly, yeah. And also this could somehow apply to Israel at certain stages, but I think you can speak better about this point.
And it's not even clear if America has a choice in the matter, because here's another extremely important reality that is often glossed over, especially by separatists. Even if you leave the world alone, it doesn't mean that the world will leave you, because the United States, with its size and geography, is either a threat or temptation. If you don't have an army, then temptation, because for starters, there is oil in the United States, so that's a good enough reason. But if you have a military and enough of forces that you can keep your country intact, then you're a threat.
We have sought no shooting war with Hitler. We do not seek it now.
Military strength strong enough to protect your borders and even trade? A threat that cannot be ignored. That is the United States.
But neither do we want peace so much that we are willing to pay for it by permitting him to attack our naval and merchant ships while they are on legitimate business.
Let's have fun with it. Let's say we're going and believing the America is an evil empire kind of scheme, right? Why give Israel money at all? Why not just force it to cooperate, since nobody likes Jews? That's like a given.
So why then would the United States continue to burden itself with huge loans, in some cases outright grants, to the Israelis, jeopardize possibly young American fighting men, when there is no strategic value involved, or little?
We haven't yet established that the 3.8 billions are. Is it fair compensation? Is it too much? This is something that I leave something for you to decide on. And it might be outdated as well, because it might be like, if you go by the J.D. Vance kind of principles, then
the only way to get to peace is to destroy Hamas and let Israel finish the job. That's a very simple thing.
Let Israel do what they need to do. It also means that you are not stopping Israel from developing things that, let's say, compete with the American interests. Then, yeah, sure, maybe it is time to stop it, because that is also parts of it. Anyway, Reagan, for example, pressured Israel to stop producing fighter jets because he realized they might actually compete with the American fighter jets. It ended up happening, but there was a lot of resistance, and it was a very difficult decision to make for Israel. I'm really jumping ahead here. All right, now the question is, how much do American and Israeli interests align? You need to have it's 3.8 billion, but if 1% of it aligns, then it's a lot less than 3.8 billion. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Let's go back to the second point that I promised. Point number 2. They try to convince the viewers that the support America gives to Israel is irrational. Let's describe the general vibe. So here's what they say. It's basically Holocaust pity that is dragged for too long.
Of course, after the Holocaust,
that was combined with enormous sympathy.
Trying to imply that the people who support Israel do it because of they cannot let go of the Holocaust, which happened so long ago that there are people who suffered from it. Some of them are still alive and actually survived a second attempt, or some didn't, like the 7th of October, but like whatever, So that's one. Or the other thing is like religious reasons where they try to showcase Christians, Jews, and people who believe in the spiritual right for Israel and, there is a God behind it or something. They try to paint it as if they are lunatics, but
it's realizing the lesson of the Bible. These are deeply religious countries in which the biblical commands, so-called, are taken quite literally.
I feel like they have an agenda because they really dislike America, to say the least, and don't really love Israel either.
Israel performed a major service to the United States by destroying a secular Arab nationalism, a major enemy of the United States.
Why are these the videos we have available? Because there is a lack of transparency. And here is an easy example. ChatGPT, can you describe Israel-US relations for me? And by the way, Wikipedia, mainstream media, and ChatGPT here, as I'm going to show in a minute, they all focus on getting this point across.
The U.S. provides about $3.8 billion in aid to Israel every year. And since World War II, the U.S. has provided more foreign aid to Israel than any other country.
Like they focus on showing how much the United States supports Israel. For example, here, with the first statement saying that U.S. support started right away.
Report by the Policy Planning Staff on position of the United States with respect to Palestine. January 19, 1948. Although a jihad, holy war, against the Jews of Palestine has been proclaimed by Muslim leaders in most of the Arab states and has been joined by Christian leaders in Syria, the U.S. has suspended authorization for the export of arms, ammunition, and other war material intended for use in Palestine or in neighboring countries. U.S. support of partition has already brought about loss of U.S. prestige and disillusionment among the Arabs and other neighboring peoples as to U.S. objectives and ideals. U.S. businessmen have reaped the benefit of the widespread belief that the U.S. had no political motives in the area inimical to Arab welfare.
Considering the U.S. placed Israel under arms embargo, I think the word modest that ChatGPT uses here is the right call. It's the most genuine part of this description because it emphasizes something that really didn't really happen that way. It wasn't like a strong, sure support. It actually like a miracle that the United States actually voted for the recognition of Israel. It was a lucky call, really, because the real story is different, and I'm going to go back to it. Overall, the focus is on the US does this and does that and does this, or as a second or third statement as collaboration or shared concerns, interests, etc. This is where Israel enters, sharing intelligence, collaborating on technology. It gives a strong impression of imbalance. And of course, the public will be the public. This lack of transparency leads to all sorts of conspiracies. Some are tainted with dislike towards America, some towards Israel, and most by sophisticatedly veiled hatred for both.
I understand those who protest that some countries have weapons that others do not. No single nation should pick and choose which nation holds nuclear weapons.
The problem is some presidents agree with them.
The US administration was very supportive to the Muslim Brotherhood coming to the power.
Which they saw as a democratic transition. That's how they described it
sadly,
at least.
Sadly, which was not true at all. I was on the ground and I was even monitoring the elections that led to the Muslim Brotherhood being
in 2012?
In 2012, and it was not democratic at all. There were a lot of manipulations. The Muslim Brotherhood are very clever in this regard. But then I think there was a sense of disappointment in the Arab Spring and disappointment in the Middle East here in the US administration that led after that to to this perception of let's leave the Middle East, do whatever it wants. If it wants dictatorship, let dictatorship happen. If it wants Islamists, let Islamists enjoy themselves, and we don't care about the Middle East anymore. But unfortunately, this led to troubles not only to Middle East countries, but also to the United States.
I don't want to get into the American role in the peace negotiations, but this is the general formula. Let me just say it shortly. Israel went on a war, devastated some country. That country realized that they cannot afford the war. They ran to the US. The US was like, this is a great opportunity to have a footprint in an Arab country like they initially wanted. And they throw Israel under the bus, basically just saying what the Arab country wants and forcing Israel to agree to the demands of the other nation. Personally, I believe that the reason the countries that had signed a peace agreement with Israel were Jordan and Egypt is water. The Egyptian and the Jordanian water situation leaves them vulnerable. Notice that Lebanon and Syria on the north do not suffer from that issue and also have zero peace agreements.
Israel's narrative has always been that they launched a preemptive strike to prevent an impending Arab genocide of Jews, but in reality, Israel just wanted to take Arab land.
I mean, I don't know whether to hate them or just applaud their incredible talent for lying. Anyway, first, let's try again. Is Israel critical for the US? Oh, look, no hesitation there. Yes, Israel is critical to the US. Interesting. By the way, America's enemies are well aware of it. So, yeah, I'll get back to that point. Can the US do without Israel? The US-Israel relationship offers a range of benefits that would be difficult to replace. Oh, are you the same ChatGPT? It's weird, like I worded the question a bit differently and suddenly it seems like Israel is very critical for the United States, but it doesn't come across when the mainstream media and the Wikipedia and ChatGPT are like, America, 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 they support it from day one, but there is a reason they do it, obviously. Also, the amount of times American presidents had proposed that Israel is trying to conduct a genocide, even though there was no genocide, out loud in the public is insane, knowing full well that there is a real risk of genocide for the Christians, for example, in Lebanon, and the Jews in Israel from the Arab Muslim side, so that they would have a choice on who to side with, those who want to commit genocide and those who don't. They would pretty often propose that idea that Israel is somehow trying to commit a genocide based on zero truth, just so that they can be neutral.
Leaders such as Azam Pasha, Secretary General of the Arab League, would be displaced by extremists such as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Hatred of the Zionists or of those identified with Zionism might be extended to include all Westerners in direct proportion to the latter's support of Zionist armies in general and of partition in particular. The partition of Palestine might afford the USSR a pretext on the basis of self-determination of minorities to encourage the partition of areas in Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Greece, with a view to setting up separate Kurdish, Azerbaijani, Armenian, and Macedonian states enjoying the support of the USSR. U.S. prestige in the Muslim world has suffered a severe blow, and U.S. strategic interests in the Mediterranean and Near East have been seriously prejudiced. Our vital interests in those areas will continue to be adversely affected to the extent that we continue to support partition. While the governments in Arab countries have partially succeeded in restraining demonstrations against the Jews within their borders, in the case of open conflict, major massacres of Jews in Muslim countries would seem to be inevitable. We should oppose sending armed forces into Palestine by the UN or any member thereof for the purpose of implementing partition. We should also oppose the recruitment of volunteers for this purpose.
In March 1948, prominent military strategists, including Field Marshal Montgomery, Secretary of State George Marshall, and Secretary of Defense Forrestal, were saying that the Jews would not be able to survive the imminent assault by the Arab regular armies.
And in 1947-1948, Truman should have known that the Arabs had literally declared their intent of genocide. out loud, and the Jews had never said so. In the contrary, they constantly called for peace.
I had to make a compromise with the Arabs and divide Palestine. The Jews wanted to chase all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Arabs wanted to chase all the Jews into the Red Sea. And what I was trying to do was to find a homeland for the Jews and still be just with the Arabs.
Obviously, it's like a pet peeve. Like, I don't know why people like grab and hold on to it for so long. Okay, let's say it's a matter of the past. When Israel invaded Lebanon, there was a real genocide against the Christians.
And I remember one night, I think I was around 13 years old, one of our militiamen stopped by and he said, Brigitte, I just want you to know that we are surrounded to be slaughtered tonight. We heard a lot of chatter on the radio, and I don't think we're going to last because we lost a lot of men. We don't have enough to defend the town. And he said, if I don't see you tomorrow, I wish you a merciful death. And he gave me a hug and left. That's the night when Israel came in physically into Lebanon.
The US was the first to recognize Israel.
Council convened with trusteeship still on the agenda.
We believe that a temporary trusteeship for Palestine should be established under the Trusteeship Council of the United Nations.
President Truman was quick to recognize Israel because he was in an almost one-man opinion on this matter. So the first to officially recognize Israel is the USSR.
May 1948, just 11 minutes after the declaration of the foundation of the State of Israel, the US became the first state to recognize Israel.
And his campaign advisor, Clark Clifford, also felt that this is what the public wants.
I remember one time talking to James Forrestal, who was Secretary of Defense, and he said, Clark, you just don't understand this. It's a question of arithmetic. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there are 45 million Arabs and 350,000 Jews. And the 45 million Arabs are going to push the 350,000 Jews right into the ocean. So he said, that's all there is to it.
And Truman did it because of his own personal feelings.
Dr. Sam Weitzman had been trying to get in all along, and I wouldn't let him in. But someone did come to see me, and he got in. This man with whom I was in business.
And when it comes to Truman, he had a Jewish friend, and he was personally convinced to try to help that Jewish friend. He said, like, you know, you never asked anything from me, and this is important to you, so I'll do it.
Eddie Jacobson, one of the finest men I ever had anything to do with. He came in, he stood around, didn't say very much, was as quiet as he could be, and I finally said, Eddie, what in the world's the matter with you? Have you at last come to get something? Well, because you never have asked me for anything since I've been in the White House and since we've been friends.
Okay, but you know, miracles happened and the USSR and America agreed to recognize Israel. But America did it even though both the State Department and the Defense Department were against it. And Truman did it because of his own personal feelings.
The speech that Ambassador Austin made at the UN came as a great surprise to President Truman.
He was against the Jewish program almost entirely.
Why does America support Israel? Reason number one, public opinion.
Outside of the White House, Jewish supporters demonstrated. They feared that the United States was going to abandon partition and to support foreign rule under United Nations trusteeship. It was vital to get President Truman to hold fast to the partition scheme.
You see, between the Holocaust and the establishment of Israel, Jews didn't have a home. A lot of them were not, they went from camp to camp, let's say it like that. I mean, one was more lethal than the other, but it was not a good look. A lot were just stranded in ships. Those who tried to go back home were. So, yeah.
It was the right thing to do.
America did it, even though both the State Department and the Defense Department were against it.
I said, all right, you two Jews have put it over on me, and I'm glad you have.
And also the public opinion is why the United States always emphasizes how much they care about Israel. This is something they do for their public, not necessarily because it's true.
Who the does he think he is? Who's the
superpower here. The story is important for context because here we are, 28 years later, and Benjamin Netanyahu is still bossing around and lecturing US presidents on how the Middle East should function.
Another anecdote that shows that America is not such an evil empire compared to others is because, for example, they don't like Netanyahu, and Obama really didn't like Netanyahu, for example, and they brought a lot of money here from foreign sources that might be connected to certain governments, like the German government, to try to make Israel more comfortable to deal with and to replace the government. And they did it by, investing tons of money on a huge campaign to try to convince the Israeli public to vote differently. And they didn't go with the other option, right? Let's say there is somebody like a prime minister or something like, Hariri, that doesn't fit the agenda of their allies, Iran or inside matters, right? They can just get rid of them. So I guess America is not so evil. They chose to put a lot of effort trying to get Netanyahu elected away instead of, assassinating him. So no complaints here, really. There is a way worse. There is.
Every American government for 30 years has been trying to get Benjamin Netanyahu out of office. Bill Clinton sent teams of people over to get Netanyahu to lose the election in the 90s. When Netanyahu says in his memoirs, Bill Clinton calls him up to congratulate him after he wins the prime ministership, gets together the coalition, and Bill Clinton says, well, we did everything we could to keep you out, but we're looking forward to working with you.
Should not be taken for granted. Nope. In 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal from British and French investors who owned the Suez Canal Company, causing Britain and France to devise military operation with the help of Israel. Pressuring Israel into it, but maybe France was like, how about I give you some nukes? Anyway, reason number 2. Israel stops the Eastern Bloc from taking over critical trade routes. Oil, natural gas, grain, and everything from toys to electronics typically travel through the waterways separating Africa and the Arabian Peninsula en route to the Suez Canal, where usually 12% of the world trade passes. In fact, 40% of Asia-Europe trade normally goes through the area, 30% of global container traffic, and at least 90% of the container ships that had been going through the Suez Canal are now rerouting around the tip of Africa. So Truman actually never stated what his real opinion is about the creation of Israel. He might have objected to it. He did call Ben-Gurion to stop the independence wars once Israel started winning because that didn't fit their agenda. The Americans took a pro-Egyptian stance back then and forced Israel, Britain, and France to withdraw and actually gave Egypt the win. Of course, that heroic American intervention only held water for like a year. Let's set that aside.
During the summer of 1948, the United Nations mediator, Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden, had been formulating a design for what he called a permanent settlement. He met with Arab and Jewish leaders. In his first plan, he proposed to limit Jewish immigration, to award Jerusalem and the Negev to the Arab state, and to make Haifa a free port. It would be charitable to believe that the coincidence of these proposals with Britain's strategic interests was a matter of chance. The Israeli decision was to reject Bernadotte's plan.
The Americans might have calculated that the moral thing to do was to put Israel under arms embargo, even though they had intelligence that had determined that the Jews are going towards another round of annihilation, this time by the Arabs, and that, by the way, includes 1 million Jews that were living in Arab lands. They were all under risk of annihilation. But to America's defense, though, Israel did have a lot of Stalin lovers in the beginning, so there was a risk that Israel would side with the USSR. By the way, Ben-Gurion, the first Israeli prime minister, relentlessly worked to stop that position. He didn't believe in siding with the USSR. And those communists later woke up from their delusions when nice Jews explained to them that Stalin was planning another Holocaust, only to fall again and believe in a peace process with the PLO. But don't worry about it, they woke up on October 7th. Now they worship the United States, I think. Idol worship is addictive. Now the question is, how much does the Israeli interest and the American interest align?
For this was the tide of Arab nationalism in flood, peoples incited to rebellion under the banner of Nasserism, and no doubt the Kremlin is jubilant.
It took the lives of scores of people at our embassy in that same city, in Beirut. But I think we should all recognize that these deeds make so evident the bestial nature of those who would assume power if they could have their way and drive us out of that area, that we must be more determined than ever that they cannot take over that vital and strategic area of the earth, or for that matter, any other part of the earth. Thank you.
Our nation is waging a war on a radical network of terrorists.
So the Brits with the Americans toppled the friendly Shine Iran that was replaced with a parcel sent by the French known as Khomeini, who proceeded to hold the US embassy workers as hostages.
And the grave consequences which will result if harm comes to any of the hostages.
But for all the mounting pressure on that front, the administration remains unshaken in its determination not to return the Shah to Iran.
Kennedy then proceeded to explain his opinion on the messed up American diplomatic situation in the Middle East. The series of incredible American blunders which led the Suez Crisis of 1956, and in general a deterioration of our relations with all Middle Eastern nations, primarily because neither Israel nor the Arabs knew exactly what to expect from us. At times, it must have appeared to many in the area that the shortest route to Washington was through Moscow. Yeah. Nothing changed, actually. Alright. Judgment aside, I propose that the new president reaffirm our sincere friendship for all the peoples of the Middle East, even the Jews, whatever their religion or race or politics. Second, I propose that we make it crystal clear that the United States means what it said, that we will act promptly and decisively against any nation in the Middle East which attacks its neighbor. Reason number 3, there is no one else. After all, they were trying to cooperate with the Arab kingdoms, West-friendly Arab governments that they had when they all were establishing their independence, all the Arab states that were created by the Brits. They had a relatively friendly kings and just kings, I think, that cooperated with the West. Okay, so that was the more attractive option, just cooperating with the Arabs. So with the different Arab governments that were established. The Egyptian Revolution of 1952 toppled the pro-Western King of Egypt.
Only 2 months ago, Egypt's President Nasser signed a statement committing him to all major planks of Soviet foreign policy.
And then, as a result of a failed 1957 CIA coup attempt to topple Syrian regime ended up failing, so they kicked out the Americans, which closed that door completely. And then in 1958, the Iraqi military coup.
The hand of violent death fell upon King Faisal and his uncle, the Crown Prince Abdulillah. They are shown here as history will remember them, loyal to country and people, holding firm to democracy's ways, while disloyal troops were plotting the coup which resulted in murder and aroused new fears in the West.
And when it came to the Saudis, they were like, you're hot and you're cold, you yes and then no. Anyway, they just flip-flopped every year. They were like, we're with the Soviets now. But then when the Americans sided with the Egyptians on the Suez Canal crisis, they were like, yeah, we're with the US again. And then a moment later, they were like, nah, we're back with the Russians, you know. So it was very flip-floppy, very hard to trust them when it comes to ensuring that the trade routes are still open for world trade. Kennedy ended the arms embargo that the Eisenhower and Truman administration had enforced on Israel. Reason number 4, Jews and space lasers, obviously. So his fantasy was that it would be intercepted with satellites and laser beams. Talk about the Hetz project and Reagan as an example here, but I mean, the laser beams are kind of, it's the next step that Israel is also developing. You know, as an empire, why give Israel financial aid at all? Why can't they just give this, you know, diplomatic immunity that Israel needs so much and say, hey, that's enough. Now give us everything you got and do it for free because you actually have no choice here. Or does Israel have a choice? Ironically, the first potential partners that he thought working with were not the Americans, but the Russians. So he met up with the Russians and talked to them about creating this alliance with Israel for the anti-missile system. Technology and arms development. That is reason number 4. Reason number 5, religion, the only non-Muslim stronghold in the Middle East. There used to be Lebanon, but no more.
They would get people out of the car and look at their ID and find out that this is a Christian family traveling, because in Lebanon, our religion is written on our national ID. They would get everyone out of the car and shoot them in cold blood.
Here is Martin Luther King Jr.
Israel must exist and has a right to exist, and is one of the great outposts of democracy in the world.
In 1958, the Nazi Pope was replaced with a Pope that actually saved Jews during the Holocaust. Pope Johann XXIII. I mean, it was just before 63 when the Pope decided to acknowledge the role of the Church in creating and perpetuating Christian anti-Semitism. You know, just before his death.
My Jewish brothers and sisters said to me amid anti-Semitism anywhere, we don't need your support. We have enough Jewish power to deal with this problem ourselves. I would still take a stand against anti-Semitism because it's wrong, it's unjust, and it's evil. If my Catholic brothers and sisters said to me, amid bigotry toward Catholics, we don't need your support in this because we have enough Catholic power to deal with it, I would still take a stand against bigotry toward Catholics because it is wrong, it is evil, and it is unjust.
For example, during the 60s and the civil rights movement, the Jewish community was very involved with that movement. And Zionism was also something that was important to the Jewish community and to Christian communities.
And my parents said to me, when they come to slaughter us tonight, we will create a distraction. We just want you to run towards the Israeli border and don't look back. See, we knew we lived 5 kilometers from the Israeli border, and we knew if we run to the Jews and beg for help, the Jews are not going to slaughter us because we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims. Any friend we ever had or anybody that cared about us was Israel, not Lebanon. The Lebanese government didn't care about us. The rest of the world forgot about us. I remember my father in the beginning of the war, and he would say, France is going to come see what's happening to the Christians in Lebanon because of all the Palestinian massacres against the Christians. My daddy would say, France is going to come. And nobody came. America's going to come. Canada's going to come. Australia's going to come. And the world forgot about us.
And what I really want to understand from you is why the consecutive US administrations did this to us. Why they did not continue their fight for a better Middle East.
Everything that is happening in America with the woke brainwashing and the invasion from the southern border is a result of those statements made during the years that were lies, comfortable lies for the moment in order to achieve American interest that had built up to ruin the American moral system. And here is a bonus reason. Morality. Israel and the United States do share a lot of their values, after all. So, in conclusion, does America support Israel based on morality? Yes, I think the American administration should be more proud of their values of freedom and democracy and understand that even though they make mistakes, what they stand for is the right thing. God bless America and Israel. Well, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Make sure to share this video. And if you want to support me, have a Buy Me Coffee link below, and Patreon and PayPal. Whatever is comfortable, it really, really helps. Thank you so much for watching, and see you later.